Welcome into episode 2, Brian. Episode 2 of the Star Wars Newsnet Timeline Show. Yes, guess what? We're still in 382 BBY
We're gonna be
because
here for a minute.
they decided to tell a million stories in 382 BBY, and it's all,
busy
going to span just a few short months. Granted, I guess we don't really know how many days a year is in Star Wars because different
Right.
planets have different rotations. So the galactic scale is always altered a little bit differently, I guess, depending on what side of Coruscant you sleep on at night.
I think actually a Coruscant day, if I remember right, I think it's 23 and a half hours. And I think that's what the galactic norm is going based off Coruscant. So it's close.
So they're moving faster than we are.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Just a little bit. I wonder if that sleep, like a little extra 30 minutes of sleep, really hurts. Like the lack of 30 minutes, that half hour.
Well, we just counted like how many things we have in this year, and it's almost real time. We're almost going real time this first like 6 months worth of stuff.
So last week we talked about, the very first kind of like canon event that we have, Queen's Bloom with Axel Greylark. And now we're going to move into our first actual full novel that takes place in the canon, the first novel storyline. And if you want to pull up the infographic there, Brian, we're going to be talking about The Path of Deceit, High Republic by Tessa, Gratton, and Justina, Ireland. Again, 382 BBY. This was released October 4th, 2022, as the very first novel in the High Republic Phase 2 initiative. I remember exactly where I was. I was walking to the mailbox, hoping beyond hope this would be there, ready for me to read the early copy, and I got it, and I am still beyond blessed that I got to be one of the first people to read the Phase 2 novel kickoff. And Justina, Ireland, part of the original group of the Luminous team that you see her there on my right. And she, one of the original authors of the Luminous team, one of the Fab Five, and she kind of has been just a mainstay in the High Republic from start to finish. And I think some of her works get a little bit overshadowed as the High Republic has gone on, because, of course, when you think High Republic, everyone goes to either the Light of the Jedi, the first one, or maybe the Rising Storm. I think that Convergence and Cataclysm are going to gain some momentum as the longer it is since they've been out. But those are typically the ones that you see first. And some of Justina Ireland's really good works have got pushed back. I mean, A Test for Courage, the first middle grade novel that came out where we're introduced to Vernestra Rowe for the first time, is phenomenal. And I got to say that bringing Tessa Gratton in as well, this is her first novel in the High Republic. These two teamed up and were spectacular. It was a spectacular way to start it off. And it's just frustrating because I think a lot of people are going to go to Convergence and Cataclysm again. But Path of Deceit honestly belongs up there, really close to some of the best High Republic novels of Phase 2 that we got. So let's set the stage. First off, Brian, before I kind of set the stage for what happens in this novel, give me your just quick, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. What were your original thoughts after reading this when it first came out?
I thought it was an awesome kickoff for Phase 2. I had just come off of Phase 1 trying to get caught up. I think you're the one that told me, hey, this is kind of, and actually I read this one. I kind of read the first two out of order. I read Convergence first, and then I read this one. This one actually does come, if you read them, it makes more sense to read this one before Convergence. I really enjoyed this book a lot. It was my introduction to the mother, to Marta Rowe, to Yana Rowe, and to all these characters, and to Kevmo, which, he still has a little bit of a role to play later, as you go through Phase 2. Weirdly, you'll see what we're talking about. But I really enjoyed all of these characters. It was a great kickoff point for Phase 2. It was full of so much mystery. You were like, where is this going to go? What are we possibly going to be doing with this group, the Path of the Open Hand? So I thought it was a great read. I could not put this one down.
It was really good, and it's a slow burn at first. It's akin to Andor. If you like a slow burn, and Andor is kind of like that. It really kind of takes the time and really sets this world building, because we have a lot to talk about and a lot to set up here. They're setting up the Path of the Open Hand, which we mentioned previously in last week's show. We're going to get really into deep on that today. And we briefly mentioned the mother, who is the leader of the Path of the Open Hand. And she is kind of in the back burner of this story. She's a looming presence over the entire thing. Think about maybe like a Darth Vader in Rogue One. She has a little bit more to say in this, given it's a novel, but it's kind of the same role. She has some epic moments where she comes in and displays her just kind of control she has over this cult, but she's not necessarily at the focal point. The focal point is going to be Marta Rowe and Yana Rowe, who are obviously, if you are familiar with the High Republic, that last name, Markian Rowe, it makes perfect sense. These are the ancestors to Markian Rowe. And I thought it was interesting at first that throughout this, we don't know necessarily who Markian is directly descended from. And that
Right.
we've kind of find that out later on. And so we find out, we meet Marta Rowe, we meet Yana Rowe, and then we meet Kevmo Zink and his master Zara McCree. And I fell in love with Kevmo right away. Okay,
Yeah.
so Path of the Open Hand and the Jedi, these are on paper mortal enemies because the Path of the Open Hand is like the antithesis of the Jedi. They
Yes.
believe that if you use the Force, you are manipulating the Force, taking it away from a random spot in the galaxy. And that's going to come into play in this. The contrasting narratives and beliefs of Kevmo and Marta are going to set the stage for pretty much the entire novel. So, between these two characters, Brian, was there one that initially jumped out to you as I gravitate more towards this one or that one for these new characters?
I really liked the Rowe cousins, Marta and Yana. I liked their dynamic and the kind of relationship that they had from the get go. They were basically refugees. They're a species that is synonymous with danger. They're just a dangerous species in general. People fear them because of what they are. And I really thought it was cool how they were refugees, but then they got brought into this this group. Didn't matter what species they were or anything like that, and how they were so different from one another. Marta was very naive and very young still, and gifts freely given. Handing flowers out in the marketplaces and stuff there on Dalna, and her cousin Yana, which I could not find a concept art of her. Um, I there's probably one out there, but I couldn't find one right, at the crunch time there at the end. But um, she is a part of this group that the mother is sending out to collect force artifacts to keep them from
Right.
being used. And she's kind of becoming a little disenfranchised with the Path of the Open Hand. And, at the other end of that spectrum is Marta, who is just, throwing
She's
herself
all
into
in.
it, wanting to do more, believing in, the message and everything. So I really liked those two. And like you said, with Markian, later on, we're not sure which one he's descending from. And it's because the name and the species, that they're, the descendants of him later on, but it's like, boy, this is where they're starting. This is a really cool jumping off point. And so I was all in on these two.
And the thing about this dynamic here, I loved Marta, and just I'm going to bring up her concept art again because we're going to talk about all about the Path of the Open Hand tonight. But just look at this. She looks so drastically different from how she's going to end up. And we start here, and she literally is just this naive child who believes in the path and believes that they can make a difference in the galaxy, believes that she's on a path of like almost like good and righteousness, and is wholeheartedly supportive of the past leadership, the mother, or, and you can bring them up, the Herald, who we're going to talk
Oh yeah.
about more as phase 2 goes on. These leaders of the Path of the Open Hand that are leading them throughout this galaxy. Really, it's like the past, the gifts freely given that you discussed. So that is a quote for those who aren't aware. That's like a saying that the path has because they do believe in like generosity and benevolence. These are a lot of the core principles of the path. Now, these are things that the mother has used and the herald and later on has used these to kind of galvanize their power and support. It's brainwashing to an
Mm.
extent of what they're actually doing. They're taking these force objects to prevent them from being stolen, but they're also searching for something very in particular as well. And we're going to get into that as it goes on. The book starts off, basically, the prologue starts off with this guy named, I believe his name's like Sonny or whatever. And he is delivering this orb essentially to the mother. He's trying to deliver this to her, and she's been seeking this, and she is so happy to get this orb. We don't really know what the orb is, and it kind of stays away for a while, and then the big reveal happens at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get introduced to Kevmo, and Kevmo is like, I am the most like energetic Padawan. I am the most charismatic Padawan. Everywhere he goes, he's going to make friends. And that's when he gets introduced to Marta, and they hit it off immediately.
Very
But
well.
something
At
happens
first. Yeah.
right at the beginning too that really forces them to have a conversation. And it's Kevmo uses the force to try to impress her and to please the young children, the littles they call them, in the path. And this immediately sets the Path of the Open Hand, members on high alert, because this is like almost a just obscene act. Like it is almost downright evil for them to consider using the force.
Something as
And
simple
this,
as just hovering a flower.
Mhm.
Like, I mean,
Just
that's
something as simple as that.
yeah.
Because they're in their beliefs that could have taken away someone's life force in a distant planet. Like you could have just killed someone or made someone very ill or just killed a
Mm-hmm.
tree or for whatever, for crying out loud. And if this is really the definition of a coming of age novel, and I wrote this in my review because Kevmo and Marta have to really find the why behind what they believe. Like they have to dig deep and go, why do I believe what I believe? And
Right.
how do I explain that in a way to make someone else understand where I'm coming from versus just I'm going to repeat to you my main talking points that I've heard for the last, X amount of years. And what is interesting is they both actually come to understand where each other is coming from, but rather than gravitate towards one or the other side, they actually become even more, I think they're more firm in their
Mm-hmm.
beliefs in this. But it's interesting how they kind of this coming of age novel, like every person has to decide, what do you believe and why? And in this instance, they both do, and they stick with what they knew. What did you think about that dynamic at play between the two?
No, I loved it. And as the book goes on, you can see both of them kind of digging their heels in a little bit more, hoping that the other person, like you said, will start to gravitate their
Mhm.
way. And they do understand as Kevmo more so at first understands kind of where she's coming from, and
Right.
kind of he doesn't believe it. That's not what he believes at all, but he understands, that's her point of view and everything. Marta is a little more guarded, and as the book goes on, there's moments where she feels like she's getting through to Kevmo, and then she just realizes she's
Mhm.
not. And especially with the age they are, and Kevmo being a Jedi, and that forbidden thing is always the thing we want the most,
Right.
right? There's this little bit of this little tweeny kind of romantic thing going on between the two of them.
Oh, there's
Uh,
a line in the book that is just hilarious. I wrote it down. I will never forget that line. That
which
is
line?
hilarious about that. So I didn't want to talk about it right now, but
Okay,
because I wanted to mention something else first. And
fair enough.
it's kind of like what you were talking about, how Marta is definitely the one that's more guarded. But
Hmm.
there was a flood that was coming in that
Yes,
looked like it was going to devastate the Path of the Open Hands camp. And Kevmo was the one who used the force to prevent the flood from happening and save some lives. And Marta was like, oh my gosh, he just saved like some of these children's lives. And how could this be a bad thing?
right,
Like, why should I be upset that he is saving the lives? And then she realizes, oh my gosh, he could have saved these lives, but maybe that cost, X amount of people their lives at another point in the galaxy. And that's when Marta realized that she wants to become like this delegate for the Path of the Open Hand to go to Jeddah and be a
right.
part of like the council of the force. And so that I thought that was like an interesting way for her to kind of see what she wanted out of this. And so they have it out.
Yeah,
And this is like they have like kind of a semi-romantic relationship at this point, but it's not necessarily like fully blossomed.
it's more of
And
a
so they
puppy
have it
love
out.
kind
Right.
of. Yeah,
So they have it out, and they're getting drinks later on in the book. They're getting drinks at the bar, and they kind of explain kind of where they're coming from. And I think they finally really understood each other. And Kevmo is like, I guess this is it. And then Marta just plants one on him, like right there. She's
yeah.
like, almost like, I don't care. She just plants one on him. He is just, whoa, what?
Non-consensual. Like,
He's
what
like,
are we doing?
what just happened? Like, and he's excited too, but he's also like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness. And of course, someone saw him and reports it right back to his Jedi Master. And the chapter literally ends with him wandering back to
their
his
hut.
master's
Yeah.
headquarters, knowing he's probably going to have this conversation. And he walks in, and I'll just never forget. And his master, they said, is just sitting there, like waiting for him, and just says, "Have a seat, Padawan. Let's talk about attachments."
Oh yeah, I
And
remember.
that's how
Yeah,
the chapter
he's
is.
like,
And I
ah,
remember just
crap.
busting up
Yeah.
laughing because I could almost just feel Kev Mo's like anxiety, like oh no, like.
Ugh. Ugh.
But and so that it was just a great part in the book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about attachments.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that your parents in there. All right, I heard about that party last weekend. Let's talk about X, or let's talk about Y. Like, you know how it
And
is.
those two had a great relationship also.
Mhm,
Kevmo and his master. They had a great relationship as well. Some of the other stuff that, later on down the road, like and we'll eventually someday get to this book, but I started Rise of the Red Blade last
mhm,
night. And when you see Padawans that their masters and them have a very strained relationship, then you see
mhm.
somebody like Kevmo and his master, and how they get along so great. Um, I thought
And
that
it's
was a really cool
fascinating
dynamic too. It is, yeah.
because they're so different as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
Macri is she's so much more stoic and
Yes.
reserved. But the book they Ireland and Gratton they painted as like Kevmo is with her because she keeps him, his master keeps him grounded and keeps him, where he needs to be. But he also breathes more life into
Into
her and gets her
right.
more excited about things as well. So Kevmo uses force to stop the flood. And throughout all of this, the reason that Kev Mo and his master are there is because they are investigating the disappearance of a force object on a nearby planet. And they have reason to believe that the path of the open hand is responsible for this thievery that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And Marta actually lets it slip about the Rod of Seasons, is what it becomes. We know it's called the Rod of Seasons
Mm-hmm.
to Kevmo. And at this point, when I hear Rod of Seasons, I'm like, oh my gosh, my instincts, I'm starting to go back to phase one. I'm like, what could this mean? And at this point, Kevmo and his master have decided, all right, we have reason to believe they have the Rod of Seasons. They're hiding something. There's something going on here. And they go ahead and they launch their investigation and they go into the camp.
Mm-hmm.
And once they are in the camp, then they end up being confronted with the mother. They discover that the mother has been stealing these force objects, and they basically use their Jedi authority to say, you need to return these or we will, do it for you. And that's when the mother takes this orb, which has apparently been growing throughout and getting brighter and more intense, and she throws it at them. And of course, what comes out of it is none other than the same leveler that we are going to see in phase one of the High Republic. It is the main creature, the Nameless. And the leveler, or the Nameless as they are all called, but one specifically called the leveler, which was be this one.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, do you want to go ahead? I'll let you go ahead and explain what these horrific creatures are.
They are from a planet called Planet X, which we find out more about later on in this phase. But they're from a planet called Planet X, and they have this weird attachment to the Force. They basically feed on the Force, if I'm interpreting it correctly.
I would say yes, Force Eater.
Force eater, yeah, that's perfect. And these creatures are basically, to put it very incredibly, just stupidly mildly, they're kryptonite to Jedi. Um, they, and I mean stupidly, like
Right.
the simple. These creatures, we were first introduced to them in phase one of High Republic, or at least one of them, and they basically feed on the Force and will turn Jedi to what they're calling husks. It sucks the life force out of them, that turns them literally to just sand
Just
and
ashes.
ash. And yeah, and so but not only does it convert them physically, but it just imbues just this utter terror in their mind as it's happening. They
Mhm.
hallucinate, they feel fear, they feel just unbridled fear and terror. A horrible way to die. Every time a
Yeah.
Jedi dies by one of these things in this phase, it's like, Jesus.
It's
Like,
as
it's
if
just,
when they feel it, it's as if they're sensing their worst fears
yeah.
heightened to this extreme level where they have no control over what it is they're feeling. And the more they reach out to the Force, the worse it gets, because the
Mhm.
Nameless feed off of that. So the more they try to reach out to the Force for the comfort, the stability, the resonance within themselves, the balance that they're seeking to find, the more that it actually eats away at their soul. And it's just terrifying. And the Jedi can sense it from far away.
Yeah.
It's if they're in the area, they're going to feel it, and the closer it gets. And these things are hungry too. It's not like
Yeah.
they are just
They
mildly walking
grow.
by. They
They
grow
grow as they
as
eat,
they
and it's
eat.
just yeah.
And so the mother throws this out, and the leveler is born and immediately pounces to the Jedi Master Macri, and it Kevmo is screaming at this point, and he's watching his master, who is a fairly stoic individual, a Jedi Master, and she is screaming in terror, telling him to run, telling him to flee, and she's toast in a matter of seconds. And the mother is like laughing at this point. She's smiling and laughing, and the husk effect is starting to take over for Kevmo, and he is manages to get out of this cave that they're in, and he stumbles into Marta's arms, and slowly the calcification effect of the leveler takes over his body, and he croaks out one last word, which is, you know, the mother, basically, and then he dies, and he's husked, and Marta takes his lightsaber and as her own throughout the rest of the book. She keeps it as her own. And then she goes and confronts the mother. But how shocked were you that Kevmo died right here? Because I
I
thought he was going to be our Reith Silas, like with
right,
Reith,
right.
was introduced in the first young adult, and then he stayed on. I thought that was going to be him. And then when he just gets off, I was shocked.
The High Republic has taught me one thing, and it is don't get attached to anybody.
Like Game of
Don't don't
Thrones.
don't get attached to anybody. Nobody is safe. There's one Jedi in particular, and I don't want to really spoil it, but there's one Jedi in phase 1 that was introduced right off the bat that was just I
Oh
loved him. One
man,
of my favorite Jedi of all time.
I'll never be over
You
it.
know who I'm talking about. He's the first Jedi to go, to get husked by one of these things,
Mhm.
and it was heartbreaking. I was like, well,
I
okay,
can't
there
wait to
goes my
talk about
favorite
that book.
Jedi right off the. I love that book, but um, so I don't get attached to anybody anymore,
Right.
especially after the Fallen Star. That one just gut wrenching all the way through it.
Mhm.
And so I part of me was like, oh well, okay, that was quick. He didn't get to stick around for very long. I kind of sensed the master was something was gonna end up with
Right.
her,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
with
it's the
him,
young adult novel. You almost expect the
mhm,
teenager, the Padawan to
to
rise
make it
up
through,
throughout,
right.
and then like yeah.
And so when he basically just crumbled in her arms, I was
Mhm.
like, well, okay, then I guess we're just going to start on a dark note. Love it. So, but I think him going and obviously it had a huge effect on Marta moving forward through this phase. And
Mhm.
we'll talk more about that in future videos. But, um, I think that was a huge turning point in Marta's character development.
Mhm.
And I feel like it had to happen because of the relationship the two of them had throughout the first you know, 4/5 of the book, the first
Mhm.
80% of the book. And then this happens. And I think that was the natural progression that had to happen for Marta.
Right. It was what was also horrific is that the mother explains the leveler as
Yeah.
being a force balancing act. So the path are all about the force being in balance and not taking away over here and not taking away over here. And so what does she do to explain the leveler? Oh, this is not some evil beast. This is not something that is a terror on
They
people.
had it
No,
coming.
they had
Yeah.
it coming. They
Yeah.
were using the force, and this is balancing it back out. And so Marta almost accepts the fact that Kevmo got what he deserved.
Yeah.
Not, and she didn't think that maliciously, but it was, I
Right.
warned him, I tried to tell him, and this is the result. This is what happens to people who don't do this. So it just strengthens her resolve to want to go to Jeddah and talk about the paths
Right.
stuff. So that was I'll be honest. I agree with you. No Jedi is safe. No one is safe
Nobody.
in the High
No.
Republic. But at the same time, I didn't think that they would just off the main Jedi from the first book of the phase. Like I
Yeah.
really thought, and I'm like, oh my goodness, they are just going for it for this phase. Like, and
Right.
it set the tone for the rest of the stories. and on these characters I really love in some of these other books that we're going to start talking about. And I'm terrified every time I turn a page because I don't know when someone's going to
Any
get bit.
moment. Yeah.
Well, what's wild is a lot of times in novels, because we have these Jedi and we know
Mhm.
how their stories end, so we don't necessarily get worried about them in the novel we're reading. It's the side
Right.
characters that are the non like force users that we have to be concerned about. But when it comes to the High Republic, that's thrown out the window because it's so far back that
Right.
anything is on the table for any of these characters except for Yoda.
You don't know. Yeah, Yoda's the only one that's safe. Out of all of these characters, he's the only one that's safe.
They husk Yoda in phase 3 and and then they're like, "Oh yeah,
They're retconning
oh
their
no,
own canon
we
again.
messed up, we
Yeah. Oh
messed
my
up."
god. Wait,
Reprint.
Yoda's in the classics? What? Where? Oh god. But no, this is a really, I thought this was a great jumping off point
Mhm,
for this
mhm.
second phase, especially coming off of this huge cliffhanger for phase one, which we're gonna end up going back to visit again. And I thought it was cool with the High Republic. They did these phases in the same order the films came out. They
Right.
did the classics and then they did the prequels and they went back and did the sequels, and they're doing the same thing, phase one, phase two, and then phase three. And so I thought that was kind of fitting too. But yeah, I thought this was a great novel to kick off with.
Mhm.
Um, and
I
so much character development from Marta. I feel like
Oh,
out of
yes.
everybody, Marta and Yana were the main two characters in this book.
Mhm.
And we haven't even talked about what's going on with Yana.
Yeah, I
Um,
was about to get into that.
cool. I'll take the lead. I got
Yeah,
you.
let's
Let's
do
go.
it. So we have Yana, and while this is all going on, there's a completely other storyline that's taking place. And it's Yana, who you mentioned earlier, Brian, is
Hmm.
she's looking to get out of the path. She's had enough. She just wants to earn enough credits. She is currently in a relationship with Core,
Hmm.
who is the Herald's daughter. And the
Right.
two of them are basically these prophets, essentially, for the path. And they go and they proselytize the path stuff. But when they're on one of those missions, the real mission is stealing something for the path, whether that be money, the force objects, whatever. And so Yana has made it clear she wants to leave. And the mother basically is like, all right, you're going to go on this mission. You're going to get it done. And Yana's like, this is my last one. And then I'm out of here. And this is where we learn just how much the mother what she's willing to do to stay in
Right.
control. They're going to infiltrate the Grafs, which, if you don't know about the name, the Grafs, if you remember Lore Santeca from, some of the later stuff in the sequel trilogy, his family, the Santecas, are these hyperspace lane prospectors, and the Grafs are like one of their rivals to these
Right.
hyperspace lanes. And this is a time of exploration in the galaxy. They're discovering new hyperspace lanes. Every year, they're sending these Jedi teams, these Pathfinder teams out into the unknown outer rim regions of the galaxy to explore. And so the Grafs are immensely wealthy. And the mother let them know they were coming, exactly who was coming, and exactly what they were doing. They were on it from the beginning, and the Graf stronghold is impregnable. It's about as impregnable as a fortress anywhere in the galaxy. And so Kor dies on this mission, and so Yana is already ready to be done with the path of the open hand. And now she has anger and resentment towards the mother, and she returns and she is hell bent on just killing the mother
She wasn't
and
supposed to survive.
taking her revenge because
Right.
she was not supposed to live. She
Yeah.
was supposed to die along with everyone else. So, Ryan, what did you think about when Yana, is now contrasted from Marta, Marta's now all in on the mother. Yana gets back, is telling Marta about this, and Marta's like, that can't be true. Like, and Marta's even refusing to believe, Yana, she just thinks that something happened.
Right. First off, Core's death is horrifying. Core dies horribly.
In
And
Yana's arms, telling her she loves her one last time.
yeah, she dies horribly, and then she has to leave. They're on the ice of this lake or pond, if I remember right.
Right.
And there's a creature underneath trying to get to him through the ice, and she has to leave her body on the ice and run for herself to survive, and she does.
Mhm.
And and just the thought of her lover's body not knowing what happened with it and everything is just tormenting her. But yeah, her coming back, as soon as she got back to the compound, when I was reading this, I was like, oh man, this is not good. This is, because people are, it says right there in the book, people are seeing her, and that she's back and kind of confused, like, where's everybody else? And, and everything. And so nobody else knew what had happened so
Mhm,
far. The Herald and his wife, his wife is very sick at the time.
mhm,
Core's mother, she's very sick at that. They have no idea that she's dead yet,
mhm.
and Yana basically just marches right into the mother's
They're having an
room, and
audience
it's like,
with
yeah,
everyone from the path. There's this big thing going on, and
yes,
Yana's like, "I'm going in. I'm taking care of business. Get out of here." But what
yes,
ends up happening is Yana finds the Rod of Seasons, which is actually what Markian Rowe has, part
yes,
of later on, which is something that can help control and tame the leveler. Whoever
yep,
wields the rod is able to control the leveler. She finds it because the mother, I guess, she just misplaced it for a minute. I don't know what happened there. And Yana basically sneaks it behind her, and the leveler is drawn to her and attracted to her. And so the people see that and assume that, oh my goodness, Yana is the leveler's champion. Yana is the
right,
path champion. And the mother sees right through this, of course, but she's not quite at the point where she can just dismiss the will of the people. She's not at that point yet. And they're not worked up into the frenzy they need to be worked up in for her to do something like that. So at this
right.
point, it's almost like a stalemate. And Yana's like, you know what? I'm in this position of power. I'm going to
Might as
bide
well,
my
yeah,
time. I'm going to bide my time. And that's kind of how it ends for those three. Marta's ready to go to Jeddah. The
mm-hmm,
mother is kind of cementing her role as the leader of this group. And her plans are going to become more clear in like some of the other novels.
mm-hmm,
And then Yana is like, I'm going to bide my time to do this. And there's no other Jedi in this book that are pretty much mentioned. So the Jedi have no idea that these two have died. They have
yeah,
no idea that the nameless creatures are out here. It's completely unknown. So we end up with Path of the Sea. All we have is our knowledge of the Path of the Open Hand and the knowledge that the Jedi have no knowledge of what is
mm-hmm,
going
right. And another thing I like about Yana and Ro, or Yana and Marta also, uh, how they both lose somebody in this book. Um, and they both see the ghosts of those people and hear their voices, and
on.
the dead kind of stay with them, and it's kind of a conscious voice, you know what I mean? and and,
Mhm.
and whatnot. And Marta, moving forward, will hear Kevmo and see, this weird ghost of Kevmo. He's not
Right.
actually there, but he's just, and Yana sees Core,
Mhm.
and it's I don't know if it's just an Evereni thing, which is their species, by the way. I don't know if we said that earlier.
Yes.
I don't know if
I
it's
think you mentioned
just
it.
a
You mentioned it.
thing. I don't know if it's just one of their things that happens with them. They just see the dead, but I thought it was interesting how they both are opposite ends of the spectrum with their visions for the path of the open hand and where they want to be, and they're both having the same kind of experience, with the same kind of guilt on
Mhm.
both of them at the same time. So it's kind of cool to see how not necessarily the same experience, but very similar experiences can shape two different people two completely different ways
Mhm.
apart from each other, even more. I thought it was a really nice touch to them also.
Absolutely, and it adds to the level of, especially with Marta, just this level of mystery around why the mother is able to manipulate people, and
Yeah.
they're so drawn to her, and it's just fascinating to see that fleshed out as the
Yeah.
series continues. So I have a few Easter eggs that I put down that I thought were fun from this book.
Okay.
One, there's a Moorband reference in the book. They
Yes, there
find
is.
something, and they have no idea what that means, but I thought that was just a fun, just
Nice
name
little word
drop from
drop.
Moorband,
Yeah.
to just little Sith stuff that going on here.
Hmm.
Another one was, and obviously this becomes a main point of Phase Two, but at the time we didn't know this when we read Phase One. It was the Forever War between Iram and Irno. This is something that
Hmm.
is talked about a lot in Phase One, and they mention it several times. But and then it's mentioned here in Path of Deceit. And I didn't. We at the time I didn't know that this would be this war between these two
That time
planets
period. Yeah.
would be such a big deal for this phase. And the convergence basically is that war, is the
Yeah.
culmination, the conclusion of that. And it was fascinating, really, to have that mentioned here in Phase One, as it's straining the outer rim, it's straining the galaxy with all of these resources being pumped in. So I thought that was like an interesting touch.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Yeah.
And then another one is so Marta takes Kevmo's saber as her own,
Yeah.
and Marky and Rowe
Had
takes a fallen Jedi's lightsaber as own.
both yellow
Same
sabers too. Yeah.
same lightsaber color. I thought
Yeah.
that was very interesting, and both for very different reasons that they took it. But I
Yeah.
thought that was just interesting how they mirror
But the
each
same
other
thing happened
already.
to both Jedi.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, it was cool.
And then last one, and I thought this was really interesting. The founder of the Path of the Open Hand is a former Guardian of the Wills from Jeddah.
Mm-hmm.
And shout out to Sharut, and everything from Rogue One. Shout out to
Baze
the
and Sharut.
boys. But I thought that was fascinating that
Yeah.
the Path of the Open Hand was founded by someone who supposedly had been studying the Force for probably years to become a Guardian of the Wills, but decided that this was the right way to go. And I thought that was just an interesting way for the path to be founded.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, and this could be a whole conversation in and of itself. Uh, they say all myth is based on some little nugget of truth, right? All
Mhm.
legend, there's some little nugget of truth that had to start somewhere, right? If it was a member of the Guardians of the Wills
Right.
who maybe thought the whole thing with the Force, if you use it here, it takes it away from there. Is there something to it? Because you start to think about, well, you got to get the Force back into balance. Is using it throwing it out of balance? You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
it
I don't
makes you
think
wonder if
so.
I don't either, but it makes you still kind of follow that thread a little bit and go, man, you can kind of see where everybody's coming from with their beliefs and why they
Mhm.
believe what they do and how it would possibly make
Mhm.
sense.
It's with any like cult or
Mm-hmm.
even religious kind of oppressive religious group, it's always rooted in something that is very logical when it sounds, and they're able to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to convince people to join in if it didn't like really make sense. If you're explaining it, if you're explaining it's going over people's heads,
Right.
then of course not. But if you're going up to these people and you're like, hey, when they're using the force and like this, it's actually taking it away and killing someone else. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just something that's very real.
Yeah.
And we see, how the path is going. I have a feeling that when the path began with discarding the wheels, it wasn't so extreme in the sense of like
Right.
it was taken away. I think the mother and people have manipulated it to the
Twisted
point
it. Right.
to twist it to get what they want, which is ultimately this revenge and this
Right.
against the Jedi that we're going to see. So
And
that's pretty much
and
all I got. But what you got?
and people who the thing with villains, and I say this about all villains who believe that what they're doing is actually right are the most terrifying villains.
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily talking about the mother here, but the people that follow the path and that follow the mother, they believe what they're doing is right.
Right.
Like you said, you get into that extremism, and there's no combating that. Like their only way through that is through it, and so that makes a very formidable foe, somebody who just believes
Mhm.
balls to bone, who's been spoon fed everything and
Absolutely.
has drank the Kool-Aid. That's just you're gearing up for just this explosive, you know, moment, which we'll talk
Mhm.
about later on. But it's so hard not to talk about what comes,
Right. Well, to some
knowing,
degree,
but
it's okay to mention some
right.
things. Like, we talked about Mark and Rowe taking a
Yeah.
lightsaber from like some of that, is good to talk about here because it sets the stage.
Yeah.
But I think that's all for this book. I
I
feel
think
pretty good
so.
about it. It was
Yeah.
it was really solid. Next book, to me, the next book is just absolutely fantastic. So
Hmm.
like next week we're going to be talking about Convergence.
I
Okay,
love Convergence.
Convergence was the first adult novel that came out for Phase 2 and 382 BBY. Zoraida Cordova is the author of this one. If you remember, she was the author. They author the story that we talked about last week with Axel
Right.
Greylark, and so this is where we're introduced to Axel for the first time in canon in terms of like when the book came out. So
Right.
I'm really excited. This book, if you like romance in Star Wars, this has it. If you like
This is
galactic,
a
like
good one.
interplanetary war, this has it is a
Yeah.
fantastic book.
Politics. It's amazing how even the politics in that book, politics are boring to me. I
Mhm.
just, but
It's
you can't have a
honestly
war without politics, right? So
it's honestly what Attack of the Clones could have been.
yes, yes, exactly. That's exactly where I was going with it. The politics in Attack of the Clones were so boring, but you can't have a war unless you have the
Mhm.
politics to kind of back it up, right?
Right.
And so the politics with these two planets, and we'll talk more about it next week. Um, but I just absolutely
Mhm.
love that. I love Convergence so much.
It's like they in Attack of the Clones is like they cut out in some of the deleted scenes the most interesting politics parts, like when Padme's giving a speech about how she was nearly killed out
Yeah.
there, and she gives this impassioned speech. Like, what? How did they include some of those things and not like? We got to talk about this, but then again, Jay off Padme in our live show again, so just
That's
got to
true. He
bring that
did.
up real quick.
He did.
Um, but yeah, so I'm excited to talk about Convergence next week. That'll be a fun book. That'll be a fun book.
It will.
Ryan, any final thoughts here before we close it out for episode 2 of the Timeline Show?
Not that I can think of, just that I highly recommend this book in particular. With the High Republic, I think we talked about it on the live stream last week. It's kind of, they've talked about how each book is kind of standalone, but at the same time, it's part of a bigger story. And it's like, that's true. So it's kind of hard to rank the High Republic books because you kind of almost have to read all of them to kind of get the whole story. But I definitely recommend this one. This one's definitely higher on my, I gave it more stars than not. So I thought
This
this
has
was
to be
a
up
great
there in
jumping off
terms
place.
of standalone books because it's a
Yeah,
great standalone.
it
Great
is.
standalone. Some of
Very
the
good.
others just aren't at all. And if you want the full review of this, there's a full review on StarWarsNewsNight.com that I wrote. It gets into, I have probably like a couple pages of non-spoiler comments for that, and I got a full few pages of just all the spoilers you ever could want from this book, and just some footnotes in there, just some fun Easter eggs as well. So Brian, always a privilege and an honor.
Same.
It's been fun. We're going to continue on with the 3-year 382 BBY. Apparently, a bunch of stuff happened 382 years
It was a
before
busy year.
Luke blew up the Death Star. But for Light and Life, everyone, we will see you next time.